Once upon a time, in a village called Omudike, there was a special drum known as the sacred drum. This drum was not just an ordinary instrument, it held great power and importance for the villagers. Each year, before the planting season began, the villagers would gather around it, hoping to see what the gods wanted them to grow. The sacred drum served as a way for the villagers to connect with the divine, asking the gods to reveal which crops would bring them prosperity. The villagers believed that whatever crops the gods revealed were the only ones they could plant. If anyone dared to plant something different, they faced a terrible fate. It was said that the gods would strike them dead. The drum was called sacred because only a virgin girl chosen by the gods was allowed to play it. Every 10 years, a girl of 15 years would be selected to take on this important role. She would sound the drum before each planting season, calling upon the gods to share their wisdom. After 10 years, another 15-year-old virgin would be chosen to continue this sacred tradition. Adobe was one of these chosen maidens. She was a beautiful young maiden from a poor family. She worked as a maid in the palace. When she turned 15, the gods selected her to play the sacred drum. Though chosen, Adobe continued to work as a maid. She had been working as a maid from age 5 and had grown to love her job and the atmosphere in the palace. As the next planting season approached, Adobe realized that it would be her 10th year of sounding the drum. This moment was significant not only for her but for the entire village as they waited eagerly for the god's message about what crops to plant. One day, the king celebrated his birthday. During the king's birthday, the prince had so much to drink and got really drunk. A guard took him to his room. Then the prince ordered the guard to get a maid to prepare his bath water that he needed to have his bath. Immediately, the guard went out to call a maid. The first maid he saw was Adobe, so he told her what the prince had ordered him to do. And immediately, Adobe went to the prince's room to prepare a bath water for him. After she prepared the bath water, she informed the prince that his bath water was ready. The prince then asked her to help him get out of bed. Adobe, feeling uncomfortable, politely suggested to go call a guard, but the prince, in a drunk but authoritative voice, told her to help him get out of bed and that he did not want to repeat himself. Adobe unwillingly tried to help him up, but the prince held her down on the bed. She tried to struggle, but he overpowered her and forced himself on her. The excess alcohol he had consumed awakened a strong sexual desire in him. He was too aroused to control his urge, which was why he intentionally told the guard to call a maid to prepare his bath water. The moment he came in her, he realized what he had done. He quickly reached for a wrapper and covered her. He saw that she was bleeding, but he was too confused to figure out what to do. He was scared of the consequences of what he had done. He didn't want anyone to know about it. He quickly locked the door so that no one would walk into the room. And then he knelt down and, almost crying, he pleaded with her not to tell anyone about it. Adobe too was scared. If the villagers found out that she was no longer a virgin, They would treat her badly. For weeks, Adobe lived in fear, not knowing what to do. 3 weeks passed, and the day of the big ceremony came. The whole village gathered, excited to witness the miracle from the gods. Adobe picked up the drum with shaky hands. She hit it, but nothing happened. The villagers were confused. They began whispering to each other, wondering what had gone wrong. Something like this had never happened before. Adobe felt her heart pounding in her chest. She was scared and wanted to cry. She raised the drum again, hoping to try one more time. But before she could, she suddenly felt a strong urge to throw up. She ran to the side and vomited. The crowd watched in shock. This was not the first time she threw up, but she had been hiding it. Now, everyone could see her. An angry old woman in the crowd shouted that Adobe was pregnant. Adobe fell to the ground, crying loudly. The villagers became very angry. Nobody asked her what happened or how she got pregnant. They all believed that she had allowed a man to touch her. They felt betrayed. To them, Adobe had done something very bad. The people called her a disgrace. They said she had no manners and had brought shame to the village. Many of them shouted that she should be punished. As Adobe cried, the crowd's anger grew stronger. She knew there was no way to escape their judgments. All she could do was weep as the people blamed her for everything. The prince stood a few distance away, his body shaking as fear filled his heart. He watched Adobe, hoping and praying she would not tell the people what had happened. His hands felt cold, and his breathing was uneven as he watched in silence. The people were angry, their voices rising as they talked among themselves. They wanted Adobe to be punished, but the chief priest raised his hand for silence. He told the people to wait. He said he needed to ask the gods for guidance before they could decide what to do with Adobe. The people listened, though they were still unhappy. The next day, the chief priest went to the palace to see the king. His face looked serious and worried. He told the king that the gods were very angry with the royal family. The king was shocked and afraid when he heard this. His hands trembled and his heart raced. He asked the chief priest why the gods were angry. The chief priest said that the prince had committed a great sin. He told the king that the prince must confess his wrongdoing and be punished, that it was the only way to calm the gods and bring their blessings back to the land. The king called for the prince. When the prince came, he looked frightened. His head was bowed, and he could not look anyone in the eyes. His legs felt weak as he stood before his father and the chief priest. After a long silence, he finally spoke. He confessed that he had forced himself on Adobe. He said he was drunk when it happened, but his words sounded weak and empty. The chief priest did not show any mercy. He said the prince's actions had brought shame to the royal family and angered the gods. He told the king that the prince must be punished for his crime. The chief priest also said that the people of the village would decide the prince's punishment. Once the punishment was given, the prince would have to serve it fully before the gods' anger would go away. The palace became quiet. Everyone felt the weight of what had just been said. The king looked at his son with a mix of anger, sadness, and disappointment. The prince stood frozen, knowing that his fate was now in the hands of the people he had wronged. That very day, The town crier moved through the village, announcing that everyone should gather at the palace. The people, curious and angry, rushed to the meeting. When they arrived, the elders and the chief priest revealed the prince's wrongdoing, that his action had angered the gods, and the people were asked to decide his punishment. The crowd, burning with anger, shouted that the cap of his manhood must be cut off. They believed such punishments would match the seriousness of his crime. After the prince served his punishment, the shame consumed him, and he felt his life had no meaning. In his sorrow, he took his own life by hanging. The palace was thrown into mourning, and the villagers shared in the grief. During this time, Adobe decided to leave the village. In the quiet of the night, she fled to a distant village where no one knew her or her story. In this new village, Adobe found peace and began a fresh chapter in her life. Months later, she gave birth to a baby girl. Over the years, Adobe raised her daughter with love and care. When the girl was old enough to understand, Adobe shared her story, speaking of the hardships she had endured and the strength she had gained.